after a presidential election based in part on preserving or repealing this law. After multiple challenges to this law before the Supreme Court, the Affordable Care Act is here to stay.
There's the President of the United States taking a victory lap after the Supreme Court supports the continuation of the Obamacare Affordable Care Act. It's going to stay alive. It is constitutional despite that ambiguous language that was in there, according to them. Listen, joining us on the line right now is the president of the Senate Conservatives Fund, former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, who fought this law in the court of law. Your reaction to the Supreme Court decision yesterday?
Well, obviously I'm very disappointed, but I'm also a bit disgusted with how they ruled. And by that I don't just mean the outcome. If you look at Justice Scalia's dissent, he captures the disgust quite simply. With this ruling, it's very apparent that words have no meaning in the Supreme Court. They are nothing but a 9-person super legislature. Even if you look back to the Fourth Circuit ruling, which is where we live in Virginia, Maryland, the Fourth Circuit, they said the language isn't unclear, but, and not to take everybody to law school, but when the language is clear, that is the end of the discussion in the law. Well, that's not what the Fourth Circuit did, and sadly, it's not what the Supreme Court did.
I got to tell you, Mr. Cuccinelli, I'm very concerned about this from a precedent standpoint. The precedent is very important in the law, and other cases will be decided based on this Supreme Court decision from the highest court of the land. They have decided that, well, if we determine that, language is a little fuzzy, then we, in our infinite knowledge in the judiciary, can look into the minds of the legislature and reinterpret it and clean it up for them. And to me, that's very dangerous.
It is absolutely dangerous, and because there's no limiting principle to that. So if you're Justice X, and frankly you like or don't like something, that you can say that same thing every time. There isn't a single law that comes before the Supreme Court or an element of the Constitution that you couldn't say that.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, why pass laws? Let's just sue over things and see if we can get 5 votes on the Supreme Court.
Exactly. These exact same 6 justices could look at the Second Amendment and say, well, it's clear the founders meant that this the right to bear arms was only for a regulated militia. So we can start.
Because we know what they thought, right, despite what the words say.
Exactly. Given that, and listen, you as Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, obviously you fought these laws, but you're also a politician, and this is a political process. What, in your mind, is the next step for those of us who still feel that this law is not a good law, and it either needs to be repealed or at the very least needs to be really overhauled so that it makes much more sense for the American people and for the health insurance industry?
Given that our own Senator Mark Warner, along with the president, lied to get it passed. You can keep your doctor if you like your doctor. You can keep your health insurance if you like your health insurance. The cost of health care will go down. All of those absolutely critical factors were wrong. They were wrong, and they knew they were wrong. They may have wanted to believe health care costs would go down. Those of us who know the least bit about economics would know that was never going to happen. It was never going to happen. So I don't. You offered 2 alternatives, repeal and maybe get rid of some piece of it. I really don't think we should back off of repeal. The greatest failure of the Republicans on that front has been naturally in the U.S. Senate. They have not been committed to advancing a repeal and putting it on the president's desk. And you can say he'll veto it, but they have yet to make him do it. Mm-hmm. They have been unwilling to use the tools to repeal it that the Democrats used to pass it. And so let's say they eventually find themselves a vertebrae or two and do this and put it on the president's desk and he vetoes it. That tees it squarely up for 2016, and it makes it a dividing point between our nominee and Hillary Clinton, the most likely nominee. And that's a good place to be.
Well, I was going to say, you actually, when you were running for governor against Terry McAuliffe, you saw the greatest gains in that race toward the final weeks when the disaster of Obamacare really started to hit home that October when the website was broken.
Absolutely.
So you see this as a political winner.
In that campaign, our plan from 2012, and remember that was a 2013 election for your listeners, was to close out from October 1 to Election Day on Obamacare, because Obamacare started on October 1st, 2013. Now, the government shutdown happened, and as a matter of news and messages, completely knocked Obamacare off the front pages for 2.5 weeks. It wiped out our closing strategy for 2.5 weeks. And to your point, once that passed through the news cycle, 2 or 3 days later, we skyrocketed and brought the race with very little support from a lot of entities that should have been supporting us to within 2 points. And that was on the strength of our position on Obamacare and the recognition by the people of Virginia, like every other state, that it's a failure.
All right, we got just a little time left here, and I got to get into another issue with you, if you don't mind. As the former Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, how would you have ruled if the governor called you up and said, "I don't care what it takes, but get those Confederate flags off the license plates"?
This is one of those examples. When I was in the state Senate, I passed a license plate bill. It was the Choose Life bill. It was actually quite a battle to get it, as you might imagine anything that's pro-life is. But that was passed as a law just for that license plate. If he wants to undo that, he needs to go get another law passed through the General Assembly that he can sign. And he doesn't get to write the law, though the example he's getting from the president and the attorney general at the national level is, it's whatever we say it is. I'm reminded of the president's interview long before he ever ran for president in Chicago, where he was asked, "What do you believe sin is?" And his answer was, "Doing something that you believe is wrong." And he has that view of the law. What do you think's illegal? Doing something that I don't think is legal. And Terry McAuliffe and Mark Herring, Red Herring, have adopted that same approach. They won elections, so they get to write the law, they think. And that literally undermines the foundation of this country. And it's sad to see it in Virginia, which is where the foundational principles of this country were first and best articulated. They were written. Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, George Mason, James Madison. It's unbelievable the historical lineup Virginia has in establishing the foundation of this country, and to see our own governor and our own attorney general literally just tossing it aside is truly a sad day in history, not just of Virginia, but of America.
They're making the calculation that any Republicans in the Senate or in the House of Delegates, if they try to make that issue, they'll be defending that racist symbol that is so unpopular right now.
What? They aren't going to have to do that, because people who get license plates will sue, and I have to go back and look at the statute. But my recollection is when that license plate bill passed, it described what was on the plate. And so you have to go amend the law.
Yep.
Right.
You don't get to just rewrite it yourself.
A battle coming over that. All right, listen, thank you, Ken Cuccinelli. Greatly appreciated.